My name is Frank Mbachu, and growing up for me was a little bit different than how it was for most people, especially those who are coming out of prison. Growing up, I did have both parents, and financially, growing up, everything was fairly well. We had everything we needed. My father did very well for himself, and he was able to provide for us. With that being said, he was able to put us in a good area, in a good neighborhood. And I think growing up, being around some of the things I witnessed and saw, I kind of got the spirit of covetousness. And I was able to see what people had and how they obtained it and just the magnitude of it. You know, and as a young man, I think naturally we have some people that are more go-getters and that aren't. And I believe I'm more of a go-getter, and to see things and to feel like that I can obtain them, I felt like, hey, you know, this is what I want. And there's nothing wrong with wanting things or obtaining anything, but I think it's how you go about getting it. But seeing so much and so much abundance, and you wanted to acquire it, and then in some angles of it, you might justify cheating a bit or bending the rules and things like that, which kind of led to my whole incarceration. And I think my upbringing from others is, you know, there was more suffering, and they felt like maybe this was the only option. For me, I just wanted more, and I saw it, and I felt like I was smart enough to manipulate the method of getting it, but still having that same desire for kind of, well, for really being selfish and doing things your way, regardless of the backgrounds. So what eventually caused me to go to prison, I think growing up, there might have been some issues with how I perceived myself and my self-esteem, and how I valued my self-worth and what I would compare it to, and how I valued others' self-worth. And I think a lot of that had to do with achievement. And I think most men have that concept, you know, hey, I'm valued based on what I've achieved, what I've accomplished. So as a young man, you see so much and you want to accomplish so much, and obviously you want to accomplish it as quickly as possible. So that speed, that desire to do it so quickly is when so much temptation and nonsense can present itself in front of you, to where even if it almost doesn't even calculate to where it could succeed, you want to gamble with it and you want to take that chance. And that taste in your mouth as a young man, and kind of as a risk taker, and just wanting more than you need. I mean, there's no question I wanted more than what I needed. And that led to just a series of poor decisions that ultimately led me to get incarcerated. My charge for what I got incarcerated for was aggravated robbery. The role I played in that was a getaway driver with a friend of mine at the time, and we decided to rob a store, a clothing store. The judge gave me 10 years in prison, which in my opinion I thought was fairly excessive due to the comparison of only crimes. That's only where I'm basing that off of, but it's the judicial system, so it's a scale. That 10 years was just the right amount to where I believe it wasn't a slap on the wrist, and it wasn't really like a giant punch in the face, but it was enough to where you can sit down and ask yourself, hey, what do I really want to do and how do I want to do it? I didn't do the entire 10. I paroled out. I did slightly less than 7 years, but it was enough to where I think a lot of guys get out, and you'll hear them speak on it, there's still a little bit left in them. And for me, there was nothing left. I did 7 years of all my 30s practically inside of a cell. And the 30s, that's your prime. That's when you really figure out what you want to do, and to just be incarcerated, not too young, not too old right there, it put things into perspective for me. And I was done. I don't want to go back to prison. It's not for me at all, and it's not for any man who respects themselves or their family. My darkest time probably would have been in prison, and maybe just the months leading up to prison. Mind you, I didn't even think I was getting incarcerated. I had a lot going on in life, and however, I believed I could achieve it and get where I needed to go, and I was going to court at the time, and out of nowhere, you know, the judge's like, all right, you're 10 years. You know, I was being promised a probation, but you know, sometimes you don't get everything you're promised in the courtroom, and it led to the incarceration. I remember thinking, when I got incarcerated, just like, okay, how am I gonna do this one? And just kind of not even really reacting so much. And then I think it was when I got on the Bluebird and went to TDC, that's when I was like, okay, this is prison? And it was a wake-up call, definitely, at Garza West, you know, sweating in there like an animal. I mean, it was horrible. So in my 6-year, 9-month tenure in TDC, I'd been in 3 different units. By God's grace, I was at units that weren't really too rough or crazy or aggressive. We had a lot of chaos. So fortunately, with that being said, in those units, you have a lot of extracurricular activities, classes, churches. The first unit I had a lot of church, class. I was in a faith-based dorm. It was structured very well, and it was positive. I just wanted to immerse my mind with something positive. If you're going to do time, remember, everything you're around affects you, so you want to focus on that. And I wanted to immerse myself in that. So I immersed myself in it. And even though at the time my faith may not have been where it is now, and I hadn't built my confidence up and my belief in this is the life I'm going to walk, I knew by just being in the midst of it that I would get there. And then from there, I went to my second unit, which was a unit that had every place I've been in, as far as my personal experience, had places to where I could get better and get closer to God. And then the final one was Carol Vance. This is where I met Harold Helm, and I started going to the Bible study classes, and I joined the ministry with Making Life Changes. Well, when I got baptized, it was a good feeling. It was just a promise that I'm going to keep God in my life. Obviously, we make mistakes and we might slide, but I think when you really keep God first and you stick to that promise, and I wanted to stick with it. I wanted to show God, hey, this is my outward confession of me following you. I wanted to commit to something. I wanted to stick with something and run with it. And I decided to get baptized and commit myself. And I remember every time I saw Harold, I'd be like, Harold, I'm gonna check out the church, and I'm gonna see you, and we're gonna do the things we talked about. And Harold was definitely a big help in that. So Making Life Changes helped in my financial development, one, by hearing the testimonies. Harold's testimony himself was wonderful, and me as a man who's always been motivated to have and acquire, I like to hear testimonies where people are succeeding in that level of success or in business. And Harold had all these testimonies that God had blessed him, and how he had the opportunity to make money, and it might not have been the right way. And he said, no, I'm gonna trust God and pray. And God was just giving him things freely, effortlessly. And I remember just being fascinated by the testimony in that class, and then even more impressed by the Bible study, and saying, okay, and this is how we do it with the money. Okay, we pray, we trust, we always pay the tithes. Okay, there seems to be a blueprint here on how to succeed. All right, so we pay our tithes, we save, we don't spend foolishly, we trust God, we don't cheat or try to bend corners or take the fast route to get cash, those ways that you may be familiar with, and keeping God first. So Making Life Changes helped my spiritual development through the Bible study and seeing all of God's promises manifested, seeing his prophecy. I think with some churches or places when Bible studies, we're sort of preaching God's goodness and talking about the love of God, which is great, but to really see the promises manifest. And when you see that explained to you, it only makes the promise that was given to you more true. And then you hear the testimonies of everyone, and now it's alive versus, hearing a feel-good story. And that increases your faith, and that's what kind of attracted me to the ministry, because I felt like I was developing as a spiritual man. The message was so much different than other ministries I've attended, because I think when you're dealing with certain people, sometimes it needs to make sense. And we can always hear feel-good stories, but feel-good stories aren't really, A and B and C. So the way it was taught to me, it was explained to where it makes sense. We got technical in the Bible. We talked about Genesis. We talked about the days of creation and what we thought, God said and what he actually said, and getting into the specifications and the whys and the why nots, and just understanding that God is not a God of confusion or of vagueness, and that he's specific and that he's detailed. And it makes, when you talk to someone like this, or when you're praying to God, it just makes it more factual versus, God help me. Say, God, this is what I'm seeking, and I know that you're my provider. It's a different type of doctrine that's being taught. And I think those who've really searched and gone through different studies and churches kind of understand that, like I have myself. I got released from prison March 3rd, 2023. And my younger brother came and picked me up, and it was, I didn't really do anything crazy. I just went home. So I wanted to go home, and I don't even think I ate. I believe I was fasting at the time. And the only thing I remember really focusing on was getting my driver's license. So I was just ready to get life started. Obviously I'm excited, I'm happy, but I'm more ready to put all these plans and all these things I've written down into practice. And manifest. I definitely stayed in contact with Making Life Changes Ministries. Those were the first people I contacted. I went to the church, I reached out to them. The love, the support, it was a great decision. I'm still in contact with them. Why wouldn't you put yourself in the midst of good men who want to assist you? It's only for your benefit and others. So how I became involved through the deacon at the church was, first of all, attending the church, showing up, being there for Harold, and just being in the midst. I was really following Harold. I saw Harold's life, and I liked it, and I wanted to reap the benefits of being around that. And I attended the church, and I was helping with the deacons. At one point, Harold asked me if I wanted to be a deacon, and I looked at him and said yes. So I'm with the deacons now, and now I'm soon to be ordained West Houston Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'm grateful for that. And I've played my part. I've helped the church. Anything they need, I want to be in the midst of doing something productive for a good organization. So that's why I like the church. One of the biblical principles that I've applied to my life from Making Life Changes is the testimony, the power of your testimony, and then just really paying that tithe and trusting and trusting and trusting. I think those two things, for me, are just kind of like one thing I really believe in. Testimony has moved me. His testimony, the testimonies from Making Life Changes moved me, and those are one things I really stick with. These biblical principles that I applied to my life, they've made a drastic change in my life because it's something I hold on to. It's the promise of God. And I think when that discipline is shown and that diligence, He'll always be there. And it's shown drastically. I'm just getting favor everywhere. You know, like I can't even accept it all fast enough, and opportunity comes. And I think when you really just hold true and stick with the promises of God, He's gonna come through. I think what my life would look like if I had not been involved with the church, it would be different, and I don't think it'd be different for the better. To say how exactly it would be, I'm not sure. However, biblical principles and standing on them has never hurt anyone, and being involved around good men who stand on them has never hurt anyone. So it's clearly benefited me. I'd recommend anyone do it. It's not always the easiest coming out, knowing you've been out in prison, people having their preconceived notions. So you want to have a team, a support group of people who are really for you. It makes sense. And that has just really helped me, just stay focused. So I would call Harold. I mean, he'd help me with so many financial advice and financial questions. These are people who've succeeded and they're willing to help you and who've done it. So I would definitely recommend keeping involved, and just involved with the church or with the ministry or with the team of people that want to support you and help you and love you. Some of the biblical principles that I've applied that have manifested as far as application was the tithing, being frugal, really purchasing what you need. And I live simply, but I live freely from a financial perspective. I don't owe anyone anything. I'm not in any kind of debt. All my finances are more than what I need, but I still live frugally, and I hold that concept at the essence of it, because I bring in, I pay my tithes, but I hold it and I keep it, and what I do spend primarily has to be something that can bring in a return later. And that's where the guys from the ministry have helped me so much in that area as well, to where I'm preparing my life to create a life for myself and others. So any advice that I would give to someone that's struggling financially, physically, or spiritually is ask yourself, what's really hurting you? And some of the habits, like, do you have a habit with buying too much fast food, or even candy or Coke or cigarettes or alcohol, whatever it is? And then physically, what are the things that are hurting you? Like, are you drinking too much? Are you eating too much? And spiritually, what's hurting you? Who's around you? The attitudes, the conversations, the energies. These things are all what harm us, but the irony behind it is we usually invite them in ourselves. So the discipline of, hey, if you like junk food, make your lunch. Don't buy the fast food. In a week, if you eat out 2 times a day, that can be a few hundred depending on where you're going to eat, versus, bringing a small meal and a lunch and you saving that money. And this is all goes back to being frugal. But now you have more than enough versus living check to check and, living some lifestyle that can hardly be maintained based on your debt to income ratio and things of that nature. So paying my tithes, being frugal, saving, being wise with your money, and knowing when you spend it out, it's not coming back. So if you are going to spend it, try to always consider what's the real investment or what's the return on that. And staying connected, praying. I get confused all the time, and sometimes I'm just like, God, help me. and I'll get an answer. I don't have it all figured out. If anything, I'm just really looking and emulating the guys who do. Final words, if any final words I'd have is just stay consistent. I think with anything, and even me being a young athlete, when I think of guys who've succeeded throughout college or high school, they just stayed with it. I don't think it's really so much about being super good or super talented or super intelligent. Just stick with it, and everything you really want will come at some point or another. Those are my final words.